biggest question that I think a lot of people ask is, why don't more victims report?
One of the things that I'm really impressed with is that if you hadn't already experienced this in your life, you got an opportunity to see and hear and feel what it's like for victims and for people who have lived through the violence of rape. I don't think that it's hard to understand why they can't come forward. They are confused, they're in trauma, they often can't think or process what's happened to them, and that, in addition to the fact that we live in a culture that allows this way more than we want to believe, there's a lot of shame with this, there's a lot of embarrassment, there's a lot of self-blame. I think it's very clear when you work with victims why it is so hard for them to come forward.
And I'll just add to that, I completely agree. You see a lot of people who feel so guilty about what they say the situation they put themselves into, that they blame themselves, which nobody ever deserves to be a victim. That is 100% on the perpetrator that they did that. But probably the biggest reason that I see people that don't report is they think they're not going to be believed. And they won't be believed by the police, that they won't be believed by their friends and family. And so they think it's just easier to suffer alone rather than having to even see if people will believe that it happened or not.
Just raise your hand if I'm too loud, because I am an Italian now with a microphone. One of the things I see as a nurse, and I just like to take this opportunity, is that there are 3 different reporting options in the state of Colorado. Over the age of 18, really, and of that decision-making capability, that you can choose to file 100% anonymously, meaning you can come to the hospital, I will collect evidence, no one ever has to know that you're there, that you will just come see me, we can collect that evidence, I can file that with law enforcement under a case number, I'll give you the case number, I'll give them the case number, I'll put it in my hospital paperwork, because who's going to keep track of a case number from a hospital visit? But that stays on our shelf for at least 2 years, the PD will keep that. And then if you decide that you want to come forward, later you do have that choice, because one of the most amazing things about our bodies is that we heal, and we don't keep those traumas on our physical body, so I only have a small window where I can collect evidence. The second is that you can do just a medical report, so coming and talking to the hospital. I can bring an advocate in if that's something that you feel comfortable with, and through the medical report option, it's kind of like the a la carte, so you can choose, do you want to talk to law enforcement at this time or not? Do you want it to go to be filed, to the Colorado Bureau of Investigations or not? So you kind of have all of these different choices from that point. Law enforcement will just get your name is the only thing. And then the third is a full report, meaning advocates will come in, law enforcement will come in, you can kind of see everybody in the hospital, and it's kind of one foul swoop. You can get everything done, so when you leave the hospital doors, it's done. Then the other options are, of course, you can just talk to advocates, and advocates is going to keep that confidential and anonymous, and that won't get further than advocates unless you want it to. Or you can report to law enforcement, and law enforcement is even brought in. I'll come and talk about what a medical exam looks like, or advocates can come, or you can just talk to law enforcement. So there's lots of different options, but I think that's not public knowledge. And so it's a lot of words to say there are options, and that's something that we want to get more out there. Or call advocates if you can't remember them, because you can always speak to advocates anonymously and confidentially.
Sam or Matt? Ooh, goodness.
Either of you like to address that first question? How do
I think from a law enforcement standpoint, it's a very personal crime that has very complex versus other crimes that people are very easy to report. Somebody breaks into your house or damages your car. So I think just the complexity of it. Very seldom do we deal with stranger assaults, and that I think are easy to report, but when it's the complexity that makes it the biggest reason from a law enforcement standpoint.
So I agree with what the others have said, and I think they're much more experts on this topic than I am. I will say that I think that the process of going through a criminal prosecution for sex assault survivors is brutal. It's brutal. And it's a mystery, it's complicated, and My experience has been in working with survivors is sometimes as they're going through that, they begin to feel like the system is designed to be against them, not for them. There is sadly some truth to that in the way our criminal justice system is designed and what due process means for somebody charged with a crime. And I've had survivors talk about that. Coming out the back end of the prosecution process can be really painful.
Let's talk a little bit more about that. Kind of and you mentioned it, Matt, but the difficulties of balancing the law piece of it, which I think you and Sam could talk about, and then also how to protect the emotional needs of a survivor. Could you guys, any of you, and Carla as well, you could probably.
So, yeah, as I was saying, the system is not it's not designed to be very supportive for complex crimes like this. And these are crimes, to my way of thinking, not just of the body, but of the mind and of the soul. And one of the most challenging things for us law enforcement, I think, Sam, is we have to deal with cold, hard rules, rules of evidence, rules of procedure, burdens of proof. We have to be objective when we look at the facts, and we have to screen those facts with those rules in mind. That's probably the hardest thing, to my way of thinking, at least for me anyway, as a prosecutor, to deal with in a sex assault prosecution. I've seen lots of different prosecutors take lots of different approaches. I can tell you clearly, to me, the most effective one is to utilize a team, utilize advocates, utilize forensic nurse examiners, utilize people to provide counseling for them, utilize people like Detective Silva. All of them can bring some compassion to that process. One of the toughest things that I think Sam and I sometimes have to do is be candid with the survivor of sex assault. And it sounds like we don't believe them. Sometimes when I'm talking to victims, I feel like they don't think I believe them, and I do. But if I want to complete the mission, if I want to get justice, I've got to set their expectations in the right place, and I feel an obligation, an absolute duty to be straight with them about what the trial is going to look like. Having said all that, we spend all the energy we have to fight for them and to protect them through that process.
Yeah, just to build on what Matt was saying, I think when victims come forward, you really want to show that compassion and understanding for them. But also, as a detective, my role in this team is to gather facts, not to prosecute. So I have to stay objective, but still be sympathetic. So I think when you hear the parts of the case, sometimes the hardest part is explaining to them that, well, what happened to them is victimized. We have to look at it from a statute point, and if it meets the statute, and how to move forward. So it's never not a matter of if you believe them or not, but just fitting that into the legal system, which, like I said, is not a perfectly designed system. But we have to work within it and do the best we can for victims.
On the other side of that is the reality that these people are currently in crisis, even if it's been months, and every bit of logic that we have about the system we use and what we have to do doesn't get through to the ways they have had to protect themselves from this incredible wounding. And it's a tough act, and victims do feel re-traumatized through the courts and the investigations, and they sometimes aren't ready or able to process things that would be wonderful if they could, but they can't.
So on the good side, one of the great things going on actually in our community right now is Patty Oakland actually runs the local sexual assault response team. And on that team, we have the DA's office, somebody from every law enforcement across Routt County, hospital representative, a representative from CMC, EMS, am I missing anyone? Advocates, obviously. And the great part about that is we do case reviews. We look to see what's gone wrong. How have victims not felt supported? How can we be more survivor-centered? And that does not mean that all of a sudden the prosecution or the police just blindly believe victims, but it does mean that they're working to try harder to be more empathetic in what they do and working towards a better way to do their questioning, to do their prosecutions. And so I think that's the great news, is that we're really working together, and they brought us into a lot of their conversations to say, how can we do this better, and how can we serve our survivors better? Oh, I'm sorry, one last thing. One way to also make the prosecution a little bit easier is Advocates does provide an advocate to go to all your court hearings with you. And so we can help describe the process, help you emotionally through the process, and kind of be that shoulder for you during the entire time. The DA, that is not their job. They are there to certainly uphold justice, but they can't be your emotional support, and the same with the police. A lot of times they'll be there to help support you, but we're there really for that shoulder and to explain what's going on.
I think something that I know has come up as we've been working on this series, can you speak to the issue of power and consent and how that plays a role in sexual assault?
I think the three of us could probably speak a lot to that. You know, right now we're making a big push for prevention, and one of the reasons for that is there's this fear among the community of people getting wrongly accused. And so we do a lot of education about what is consent. If people are honestly saying that they don't know what consent is, then we want to help make sure that they know what it means. So consent is a big thing to us. A lot of people say that there's this gray area, and kind of the motto that Patty and I go by is there is no gray area. It's black or white, it's either sexual assault or it's not. But we mean that as in you should never let there be a gray area. Don't take that risk. That's how you get accused. It is up to you to make sure that you know that you are 100% on the right side of that line. And so we do a lot of education about consent. The power piece is a big piece too. A lot of people think that sex assault is about just having an uncontrolled sex drive, and that's just not true. There's plenty of research that probably Carly can talk to you better than I could about that. But it's really more a sense of power. It's a sense of oppression. It's showing that you can do to that person what you want without them being able to do anything about it.
I have a little different perspective in working in the field, and that is that we can't always assess the history of individuals who go through this. And for many people, there have been other times in their life when they have felt powerless. And one of the things can get very triggered and recreated in this is a real sense of powerlessness that has gone on a lot longer. And that's a real challenge in this field, figuring out what has been their history and what has been their strength going into it and their resources. And so there's a lot that goes into the powerlessness that women and victims feel.
Consent cases are what we call consent cases are some of the toughest ones. Under Colorado law, and this is pretty consistent everywhere, the perpetrator has to actually know, not they should have known, but they actually knew that the victim didn't consent. And that can be a really, really tough thing to convince 12 strangers of. Even if you have corroborating physical evidence, if the perpetrator comes in and says, yeah, we had sex, she wanted to, well, why do you think that? And if they tell the right story, and if alcohol's on board or drugs are on board, and the victim is unable to really articulate much memory or doesn't have much memory that's in place, those are really hard cases to prove in court. Our detectives, our police officers, our law enforcement community does a really good job of just hunting down every little piece of corroborating evidence we can find. Pretext phone calls can be a really effective tool. If you can just pull little bits or just get little bits of memory from the survivor, from the victim, that we can confirm independently, even if standing alone, they're meaningless, we can show a lack of consent, or we can show that she's telling the truth to the extent she can remember much at all. I think what Lisa said is absolutely critical. A big piece of that, for me anyway, to my way of thinking, is educating particularly young boys, young males, on what consent looks like. Those are the hardest cases, and we oftentimes have to decline when we get those cases because we simply cannot, under the rules, under our ethical obligations as prosecutors, go into court when we know there's no possibility of a conviction.
Coming from the nursing side, you don't have to necessarily know right off the bat if you were sexually assaulted or not. I know that sounds really weird, but with the neurobiology of trauma, to not get too science nerdy here, basically our brain has this influx of hormones. We're not thinking clearly. We're not really knowing kind of where our thought pattern is. And so from my standpoint, you can come see me 24/7, 365, and we can talk through it. You don't need to know for sure if there was consent or not consent, especially if alcohol or drugs were involved. If there's fear, maybe you were, doing an illegal drug at the time too. My job is not to report that to law enforcement, but just to make sure that you're safe. So from my standpoint, as far as consent goes from the medical world, if you feel that a harm has been done to you or you have concerns for your body, you can just come see me. I don't have to know anything further than that. We can work through that.
Anyone else?
I'm sorry, just real quick, I did see a question out there, but one of the things we're also working on with the DA's office and law enforcement is really throughout the history that I know of, the DA's office and law enforcement do not prosecute for low-level offenses when somebody is the victim of a sexual assault. So if somebody is drinking underage, using a false ID, doing drugs, that is not their concern, and they won't be prosecuting that if you come forward. We hear that as a reason not to report a lot, that, well, I was at the bar, I was 19, I don't want to get that on my record. Well, that's not actually a concern, and so if that's ever a concern, call advocates, we'll talk you through it. Certainly bigger offenses, dealing drugs, killing people, can't really just let those go. But that is just an important message that I do hope you guys kind of spread throughout the community.
I just had a question going back to education. You hit on it and you hit on it. When do you guys work with the school systems all to educate? What age do you start talking about not only this is my body, don't touch me, but also talking to boys about what consent is and what isn't for boys? Where is Steve-O in relation to education?
I am so glad you asked this question. Yeah, and I don't know if everybody heard, but the question was, when are we starting to educate here in Rock County? So I'm a nurse by trade, but I've started to work with advocates for the prevention piece for exactly that reason. How are we supposed to know what consent is? How are we supposed to know what help we're supposed to get if we're not out there actually talking about it? So this spring, we have worked with every single high school in all of Rock County, and I did at least one presentation to every single high school, making sure that it was consistent language, that all students kind of knew across the board, an open, safe environment that they could talk, because the other thing that I've learned is that maybe people's definitions of sexual assault can be different. So you might have somebody thinking, and I'm going to use biological terms here, but it's only rape if it's a penis to a vagina. That's not true. And so that's one of the things that I touch on, that sexual assault can be all sorts of things. Then we have unlawful sexual contact, and we talk about that. We talk about what to do if you think you were sexually assaulted. And sexual assault can even be kissing without your consent. And so we go through all of that. And all 5 high schools in all of Rock County I got to go present to. Steamboat Springs High School invited us to all of their spring sports teams. And so a number of us kind of presented those 20-minute presentations to 11 sports teams. So it was hard and fast, but it was really great. Hayden High School had me back twice, actually. After I did the first presentation, they invited me back again to come talk a little bit further about forensic nursing and what that looks like. And Liesl can talk a little bit about the future, but we're hoping to talk more. I have done a couple articles with the Steamboat today about starting from your infant, your toddler. How do you teach them that this is their body, and what do they do if somebody's touching them, or if they're touching somebody else, what's right and what's wrong? And so that is something we're starting to touch on, and we do want to talk more about.
And I'll just say real quick, we have been positively overwhelmed by the school's response to us. When we started reaching out, every school we reached out to said, yes, yes, please come in and do this work. And honestly, poor Patty, she was running all across the county giving these presentations. Most of the schools we're working with on getting posters in their bathrooms with our Safe Line information so that if kids ever have questions that they want to ask anonymously, they can call us. But the biggest thing that we've known and that we have been requested to do is to get into middle schools first and foremost. Unfortunately, that is a capacity issue. And so we are currently looking for funding to get a child youth advocate on board. But we think that the conversation really needs to start, elementary school, daycare level. And it is a totally different conversation, so don't freak out when I say that. We're not talking about sexual assault to 4-year-olds. But you can talk about what is consent. You can talk about boundaries, you can talk about empathy, and those are all the little blocks that keep kind of building, so by the time they're getting an actual conversation about sexual assault in high school, they already know the rules, they know the principles, and now we're just giving them the tools to not be accused, not be a victim, and even bigger, which I think is what we hit on the most, is how do you intervene when you know something's going on?
I want to kind of add a footnote to all of this, because as long as these kids are growing up in homes that have violence, teaching them through a talk is probably not going to be as effective. That this is about violence in this culture, violence in a whole lot of areas that is unfortunately working against the work that we do. So.
Other questions out there? Okay. Oh, Sarah.
I have a question about, I guess for any of you, I have a question about like the rates of perhaps like reports versus charges and charges versus convictions. Like what are our local rates looking like and why?
So sadly, at least since I got back, our data collection in the DA's office anyway, and the PD might have different numbers or different views. Our data collection has not been great. We've categorized crimes for 2014, at least through first half of 2019. The category of sex assault is violent crimes for the most part. And said that, I would say that I don't know what the rate of report versus charges is exactly. I think most of the cases that come to our office do get filed. Is that fair to say, Sam? Do you think? The cases that get reported to you that you guys forward to us, I think the majority of those get filed. And then convict. What's that? Definitely majority. Yeah. And then the rate of conviction, pretty decent for overall. The trials can be hard. Trials can be tough. There are cases, a lot of times victims will tell us, I need this outcome. I need this to happen. And I have to say, the only way we can do that is to have a trial. And here's what that trial is going to look like. And then they may say, well, what can you get? So we'll plea bargain. Most of the plea bargains are decent. They involve prison time. They involve felony sex offense convictions. They may not involve 25 years of prison, but 4 to 6 years. The trial conviction rate, district-wide, is really what I'm more familiar with. We have very few sex assault trials in Graham County. Most have been in Moffett County, the trials, and then here in Route County. I can only think, I'm trying to think over the past 5 years, there have been 3 felony sex assault trials in Brown County, I believe. Going to trial, felony sex assault. 1 conviction, 2 acquittals in the past 5 years. That's on trials. There have been several others where they plead guilty to attempted sex assault or whatever it might be, and then they get a determinate number of years. One of the biggest pieces of leverage we have, if you're interested in getting involved with your legislature, I think there might be some change being pushed next year, is indeterminate sentencing is what applies in Colorado on sex assaults. And what that essentially means, if you're convicted of certain offenses, sex assault being one of them, the sentence is, say, 4 to life, or 6 to life, or 8 to life. And then it's the Department of Corrections that decides after 4 or 6 or 8, when, if ever, do you get out. That's a huge stick. I mean, frankly, we have to be very careful with that. So when we have that, even in the tough cases, that's really why I think we're able to secure a plea to an attempted sex assault, which allows that sentence to be determined at just a determined number of years, 6 years. So loop back around with me in about 6 months and we'll have way more details on it.
This is actually some information that we've all kind of been requesting. I do think it's lower than most crimes for across the board, and some is just the challenges of those cases, but within our CERT team, we're actually starting to collect some of that data as well.
Another question, is there anything, we know this is a problem nationwide, but do you think there's anything about our community that could either be contributing to it, could be making it less of a problem? Could you guys address that?
I speak a little bit, people ask me that quite a bit about what attributes to it. And I think it's just the culture of the town. I mean, the high level of drinking, the age of people that are here, the tourism and the drugs, all that kind of contributes to the, I think we have a pretty high rate overall in the community because of those factors.
I would add, living here for 41 years, I think there's also a culture that wants to deny that there are problems in a community like this. This is paradise. And people, and I've met many, who don't want to know that there are serious problems here.
Echo what Carla said. I have had, when you start a jury trial, the first thing you do is you pick the jury, and that involves the lawyers interviewing the panel of people. And I have had jurors essentially say, there's no sex assault here. How could there be sex assault here? Flip around. I think that's a big problem for us. Campaigns like this, that's what, public awareness is critical on that front.
Okay. Did you have something, Lisa, you wanted to add?
Well, I could just add, I definitely would say that we're any lower than anywhere else. Kind of the statistics show that 1 out of 4 women are victims of sexual assault, and we've been doing a lot of surveys. I think just the shoes, we have over 50 shoes here today, can kind of speak to the fact that certainly it's happening in our jurisdiction, and it's unfortunately happening. I wish it was a lower rate, but it certainly is not a lower rate than anywhere else.
Would you actually attribute the sexual assault rates higher to people having money, thinking that they can actually escape from the consequences of it because of the fact that they have a wealthier family or a privileged culture?
So just to reiterate the question was, is kind of the affluence of our community a factor in seeing higher rates of sexual assault? I'm not sure I've seen a correlation between that. I've certainly seen it as a factor in sexual assault, so seeing perpetrators who think that they're untouchable, or families that think that their family member is untouchable, but that I haven't seen a direct correlation. Has anybody else? To me, it's kind of the same across the board. Yeah. So I think it's certainly a piece of the puzzle in some of the cases, but I'm not sure it's necessarily a factor that's increasing rates of sex assault.
Okay, what can people do to prevent themselves from being sexually assaulted or from being accused of sexual assault?
It's all about consent, right? It keeps coming back around to that, and that's part of that education and conversation and things like this. The more we talk about it and the more we can say, was consent in the room, being able to verbally have that yes, not just the lack of a no. And that's kind of the big thing that we talk about in high school and I talk about at CMC. I'll be talking to Ski Corps this winter that really at the end of the day, to not be accused and to not be assaulted, to be able to be comfortable and be able to be open about it and talk about it, and that bystander intervention, that you feel empowered, that there's something in the room that you can say something and speak up, however that is, which I love. My high schoolers always come up with the best ideas. My favorite thus far has been you can awkwardly just go in the room oh, the party's going on in here, stand there awkwardly, very well knowing what's happening, but just to intervene in that. And not everybody feels comfortable saying, hey, stop that, that's not okay, that's rape, but to use your own powers within you. And I think that's really, at the end of the day, it's, for so long we've been talking about how to not be raped in our culture, and we really need to turn it around to not only just how to not rape, but how to really empower one another and support one another in this and give it a voice. Liesl touched on this a little bit in that zero tolerance environment. In my work with the International Association of Forensic Nurses, I was studying a case that there was a school principal of 13 schools who perpetrated hundreds and hundreds of kids. He did not touch a child in 2 of those schools. So in 11 of those schools he perpetrated, in 2 of them he never touched a child. And when he was caught and he was asked why, he just said, I just didn't think I could get away with it. You know, the parents were involved, the teachers were kind of talking to you, and that was kind of the light bulb in my brain that went off as I was on the airplane. I was like, oh, Route County needs to be that zero tolerance. Like, yeah, we can't get away with it here. And that's really kind of a long story there, but just by us making it not acceptable.
I think the question directly of what can you do not to get raped puts it back on the victim, and it's their responsibility. So I don't like the question exactly. I think you can definitely do things to decrease the risk, just like in any crime, but you never know when you can be the victim. So I think that's important. There's a lot of things about watching out for each other. Alcohol plays a huge factor, so have a plan and not go out. But I would never say that it's up to the victim to not get raped. That's a kind of dangerous thinking. But I think that as a community, there's a lot we can do to lower it. And I think what we've done here with the paper, I think that's a really good start.
I think that's it. I would like to give you guys maybe each one more chance with the microphone to say anything you didn't get to say. Maybe, what could the community do better to respond? I don't know, but I'll let you guys close with maybe each saying something that's on your heart or mind.
You have to watch out for each other. You really do, I think. And as a prosecutor, I only ever see this when it's all gone bad. And that's the first time I become aware of it. It's happened. It's gone bad. And I'm a huge believer. I'd rather not have to deal with it at all. So please watch out for each other. And if you ever have any question as to whether you may have been sexually assaulted, don't doubt yourself. Talk to these guys. Talk to advocates. And understand that even though when you come into our office, the prosecutor's office, we may appear a little bit cold, we're not. We're trying to get justice for you. We have to go fight in the courtroom, and that requires a hard and cold focus.
Just say that this is a really hard subject. It's a really hard thing to work with, to be part of, and for the victims as well. But I'm just proud to be part of this team. I think we've done amazing things in the last few years. With the DA on board, I think we have a great working relationship with advocates. I think we have an amazing advocacy program here in this community. I think we're overall very lucky to be in this community with it. The paper to step forward for everything that Patty's done. It's just a really good thing.
You guys are all here for a reason, and if there is anything that I can do, that is my job with advocates. With hospital care, if there's something that you ever want to talk to about, please let me know. But yeah, the social change program is really off to a great start. We just started this in October, so if you feel moved that you want to talk about something, or you have an idea, or you read something or saw something on the news, let's chat, let's have coffee, let's work through that, because I would love to involve more of you.
I have 2 thoughts. One is, having started Advocates 30 years ago, doing many things that were going to be helpful. I'm very impressed with the new program and the things that are being done to push for a lot more involvement and a lot more community education. The other piece that, as a therapist, I tie to this, that is, I think, an important piece that has been correlated to sometimes victimization is that has to do with children who are being abused. And there is a correlation that the lack of ability to protect oneself that's learned as a child can impact the vulnerability of women to be then assaulted again. So I think the children and the issue of violence in the home is a huge factor in all of this.
Sorry. Just to add on that, I am working with the child protection team and other components of Routt County, and we agree that we have to start young and protect our young. And so that is something that at Advocates we're really trying to push forward and support the kiddos of our community too. So I think there's just two things I want to add. Once again, we do have information for Advocates out front if you want to take some for yourself or friends. We are happy to answer any questions when you call. You do not need to be a victim yourself. You could be calling about somebody else. You could just be curious. We want to answer all your questions. The other thing I just want to mention real quick is we do have a program actually starting next week. It's called Good Night Out. And it is an initiative we're doing with the bars in Steamboat and actually all around county, but we're starting in Steamboat. And we have two champion bars, the Barley and Old Town Pub, who are going to be working with us to essentially start this bystander intervention training with all their staff within the bar. They're going to have a safe and sanitary place to put your drink within a bathroom. They're going to have literature all over their bathrooms about how to get help if you need it, a safe place to go if you think that you are in trouble. We're really, really excited about this program, so if you know any restaurant or bar owners in town, please have them get in touch with us as we will be rolling it out to everybody else come fall and then spring. So, and thank you so much for those of you who were able to stay till the end.